Quantitative evidence which supports the cyclical nature of the rise and decline of cultures is presented. The data, together with a knowledge of history, permits the construction of past cycles involving the ancient world. The same data and the current developments lead to predictions about the next cycles. In a number of cultures, there is an implicit belief in the cyclical nature of phenomena. This belief is based partly on observation, for example, seasonal cycles and all that is triggered by them, and partly on philosophy. A number of historians and philosophers have developed theories to explain the rise and decline of cultures. Ibn Khaldun, a world-renowned Arab philosopher and historian of the 14th century, expounded a theory based on a concept called asabiyya, or social cohesion, leading to the rise and decline of societies. Oswald Spengler, a German philosopher, believed that the West had passed through the mature, creative stage of culture into the stage of reflection and material comfort, and that the future would bring a period of decline. Arnold Toynbee, an English historian, believed that the decline was a process of exhaustion, and the rise was not a result of superior racial qualities or geographical considerations, but rather a result of challenge in a situation of special difficulty that rouses people to make an unprecedented effort. Finally, Ravi Batra, presently an economist at Southern Methodist University, used P.R. Sarkar's theory of social cycles to predict the economic performance of Western and Eastern nations into the next century. Being technically inclined, we set out to investigate whether quantitative evidence of the rise and decline of cultures exists. We have discovered such evidence, which has led us to write this paper. The discoveries lead to some interesting predictions about the future, as we will see. Ideally, we would have liked to see included several cultures from the ancient world, such as China, India and Egypt, as well as several from the pre- and post-Christian world, like Greece, Great Britain, Germany and the United States. Due to the difficulties associated with finding quantitative data pertaining to the ancient cultures, we have had to limit our scope here to the latter four for which reliable data are available. Investigations pertaining to the ancient cultures are underway, and the results will be communicated in a future paper. Our principal source of information is the Encyclopaedia Britannica. The encyclopedia contains in-depth information on the Western cultures. Persons with outstanding achievement are selected for inclusion in the encyclopedia after a careful scrutiny by a board consisting of international scholars. Thus, we assume that an indication of how well a particular culture has performed or is performing may be obtained by examining the number of persons from that culture listed in the encyclopedia as a function of time. With this background, the data on Greece, England, Germany, and the United States were compiled. We found that 434 persons from Greece, 3,850 from Great Britain, 1,592 from Germany, and 4,411 US citizens are listed in the encyclopedia. These data were plotted and are shown in Figure 1 through 4. Figure 1 is indicative of the rise and decline of the Greek culture, with an unmistakable peak at the 5th century BC. There is little activity after about 500 AD. Figures 2 through 4 show clear peaks at 1860-1880 and 1900 AD for Great Britain, Germany and the United States, respectively. The last three peaks are in terms of the decade of birth of the listed individuals, and so in terms of the calendar year, the peaks probably occurred 50 or so years later. The pioneering contributions of ancient civilizations to humanity are well known. One example from the Indian subcontinent is illustrative of the awesome heights that the Vedic Indians had reached. They wrote the Vedas, and in Sanskrit, Veda means storehouse of knowledge. The earliest among these is the Rig Veda, estimated to be 4,000 years old. The Rig Veda contains 1,017 hymns. Assume for a moment that the Vedic Indians believed in the cycles of excellence. Having developed deep knowledge, They must have wondered how they could preserve the knowledge for persons who would live in the next ascending part of the cycle of excellence, presuming that during 1,000 years or more of decline between the cycles, their successors would not have the capacity to absorb it. They appear to have devised an ingenious plan. They wrote the knowledge in the form of hymns to be passed on from generation to generation in an oral tradition. They must have reckoned that attempts to preserve knowledge, say in astronomy, as dry facts would not have much of a chance of success. Coding it in the form of prayers had a better chance. That they succeeded is evident from the fact that even in today's India, there are people who know the four Vedas by heart. However, they only know the surface meaning of the hymns. A number of examples can be cited that are indicative of how far down a society can slide, but we will be content with just one. Many of the other ancient cultures are today referred to as the Third World. This background permits us to conclude that the ancient cultures have experienced rise and decline. The vision provided by the evidence in figures 1 to 4, and this background permits us to construct the previous cycles pertaining to several ancient cultures. For some additional insights into the contributions of the ancient cultures, the reader is referred to Michael Wood's Legacy. Figure 5 shows a qualitative plot illustrating the rise and decline of several ancient cultures, along with the same for pre- and post-Christian cultures. There's a great deal of uncertainty about when the peaks associated with these ancient cultures occurred, but there's little doubt about the existence of the cycles. Figures 1 through 4 lead to a number of observations. Within the span of some 6,000 years of known history, the cycles appear to have begun in the east and moved westward through Greece and on to the United States. Of course, if the rise and decline are indeed cyclical, then there is really no beginning and no end. No one culture can claim timeless and perpetual superiority. There is reason for pride based on performance at a given point in time. But arrogance has no basis in fact, since decline is inevitable. Thus, when a Japanese cabinet-level official makes derogatory comments about the characteristics of the US labor force, he shows a certain lack of understanding about the cyclical nature of excellence. There is a lesson in these data, too, that there appears to be no valid basis for discrimination on the basis of intellectual superiority. A study is said to be in progress in the United States whose aim is to identify genetic links to criminal behavior. This type of study is tantamount to taking a time slice from one of these figures presented and arriving at a certain conclusion. For example, a 5th century BC slice would perhaps have shown that Greeks are uniquely blessed with a large number of geniuses, a conclusion that would be incorrect if applied in 1900 AD, in the same 5th century BC. We submit that such studies provide no information that is fundamental in nature, and at worst they create unnecessary friction among races at a time when racial and communal harmony and understanding in today's world of increasing diversity is the call of the day. It should be mentioned that the achievements of ancient cultures were due mainly to indigenous efforts. The rapid advances in communication technologies in recent years will have an interacting effect on the future cycles. Now, the million-dollar question, is the US in decline? Figure 4 appears to indicate that the US is in decline. The nation's ills prompted the former Secretary of Education, William J. Bennett, to compile an index of leading cultural indicators. However, several reviewers of this paper have pointed out that in posterity many persons could be added to the declining portions of the curve, thus wiping out the negative trend. Our feeling is that the numbers required to wipe out the decline are so large, like twice as many or more in many years, that trend reversal is not likely. But, if that occurs, so much the better. Some additional observations are in order. At the outset, we recognize that unlike many other nations, the United States of America is a nation of immigrants. To shed light on the situation concerning the United States, we borrow a concept from control theory. We visualize that creativity, productivity, and performance is a two-input, one-output problem. The inputs are genetics and the environment, and the output is performance. In other words, creativity and performance are a function of both of these inputs. By environment, we refer to all those factors which nurture and encourage productivity and performance. In some cases, genetics has the predominant effect. The prevailing environment does not affect the performance. 3 examples among many in this category are: 1. Amadeus Mozart, who had mastery over Western classical music at the age of 5. 2. Dhyaneshwar, living in rural India in 1290 AD, interpreted the Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit into Marathi at the age of 18. And 3. Sir Isaac Newton was building mechanical toys as a boy. For a vast majority of individuals, however, the environment has a tremendous effect. This is the success story of the United States. It is quite possible that providing a suitable environment to persons from cultures which are on the ascending part of the curves of cyclical excellence may have led to substantial accomplishments by these individuals. For example, the performance of individuals from Eastern countries, China, Taiwan, Korea, India and the like in the United States over the past 30 years has been outstanding. Thus, when a US politician says our Asians are better than their Asians, what it really means is that the environment has enhanced the performance of individuals from the ascending cultures. Thus, although the data in Figures 4 appears to show that the United States may be in decline, it is possible that immigration has favorably affected the rate of decline. A number of reviewers of an initial draft of this paper have cautioned against relying on limited sources, no matter how reputable, to draw conclusions about an entire society. We certainly respect this view and have inserted it here to bring it to the attention of the reader. If indeed the decline is real, then one might ask, how can it be stopped or reversed? During the recent presidential campaign, the Perot camp and the Clinton camp articulated the problems facing the country and outlined approaches to tackle them. We believe the problems they identified are symptomatic of deeper causes. Merely tackling them may not be sufficient. In our estimation, the fundamental problems facing the US society are: first, the gender form of the Almighty. The society needs to recognize that there are multiple paths in search of the truth. No one path is superior to others. There is no difficulty with the proclamation about the existence of the Son of God or a prophet, but the implication that the Almighty he leads to a number of significant problems. The most significant among them is discrimination against women. Such views are also not helpful in a society that is growing more and more diverse. Second, the society needs to properly differentiate between what are dharmic issues and which ones belong to the domain of civil laws. Failure to do this results in tension and turmoil. One may seek the appointment of individuals with a certain bent of mind to the highest court in the land and may well derive certain decisions, but the controversies will not end. Control desire, attachment and the ego, and find peace and contentment. The problems with the healthcare system are a good example of how greed can get the best of us. Those responsible for the mess not only include the providers of healthcare, but also the receivers of that care, namely the members of the society. The Eastern advice to shun desire and attachment is not practical for most people, and the Western approach is not working. The Greek proverb pan metron ariston, meaning moderation or balance, appears to be appropriate. In matters of relationships among spouses, move away from looking for perfect compatibility to compromise and sacrifice. Zero defect is a laudable goal for inanimate objects, but is inappropriate for dealing with relationships among spouses. Former President George Bush correctly identified the breakdown of the family as a fundamental problem facing America. Recognize that Gaussian-type distribution applies to all cultures. Thus, while non-whites, minorities, deserve special assistance in many cases, the members of the majority community at the lower end of the spectrum also deserve help. Failure to deal with this issue is likely to lead to increased racial tension in coming years. The stress level in the society appears to be too high. Yoga, meditation, and biofeedback may help relieve some of the anxieties. The value system. The free market economy has a number of virtues that we are all aware of. However, one drawback is that it appears to warp one's sense of values. How else can one explain the disparity of income levels between a rock star making $50 million per year or more and, say, an English teacher? Literacy and education. All of the above will fall on deaf ears without proper and enlightened education. We hasten to add that putting these ideals into practice is not at all an easy task. We certainly do not claim mastery over them. A related thought here is that if the society has not come to grips with the foregoing issues, then perhaps it has not yet reached the peak, implying that the decline can be reversed. If or when the society reaches that ultimate level of enlightenment, then, we are afraid, there will be nowhere else to go but down. The plots showing the next cycles may be prepared based on the following observations. One is that the achievements of Japan and the neighboring small-sized countries in the East over the past 50 years have been phenomenal. It was not much over 30 years ago that the Japanese products were known for shoddy quality. Today, some of the best products in the world are made in Japan. Also relevant is the observation about the impressive accomplishments of the persons of Asian origin in the United States and the performance of the Asian children in international mathematics and science competitions. Dr. Subhash Kak, an Indian-American professor of electrical and computer engineering at Louisiana State University, has recently unraveled the code in the hymns from the Rig Veda. Finally, there is consensus among business circles that the financial center of gravity is shifting toward the east. But the rise in the large systems, namely China and India, appears to have begun. There is ample evidence of significant achievements in both of these cultures over the past 50 years. The foregoing discussion permits the construction of the next cycles, as shown in Figure 6. A comparison of the material progress in Japan, in contrast to the same in China and India in the recent decades, leads us to believe that the rise of Japan on the cycle of excellence has quickened in part due to the small size of the system where quick changes are possible, but is also due in part to the success of the Japanese in adopting, adapting, and improving Western technologies. This observation leads us to state that if the rate of rise can be speeded up as shown by the Japanese example, then it may also be feasible for the United States to reduce the rate of decline as alluded to earlier. Some reviewers asked for an explanation for the gaps that appear to exist between the cycles. We note that only a few representative cultures have been studied to make the point about the cyclical nature of excellence. Other cultures may fill the gaps. On the other hand, we do not know of any fundamental reason why there can or cannot be gaps. It is an open question. We have presented evidence of the rise and decline of several cultures from the past and present. There is evidence too that some of the early cultures are on the rise again, which leads us to ponder if the phenomenon is cyclical in nature. Unfortunately, reliable historical information is available only for several thousand years, and therefore a categorical answer cannot be given.